Hello and welcome to this webinar, 5 strategies to increase the impact of your teaching without increasing your preparation time. My name's Stephen Sonsino and I'm a fellow in the Centre for Management Development at London Business School, where I teach leadership and change to companies all over the world. 20 years ago, I attended a program called the International Teachers Program. It's run by a consortium of 9 business schools from around the world, and when I attended in 1999-2000, it was at the NYU Stern School of Business. And I have to tell you, it changed my life. It helped me to realize that not only as a faculty member, not only did I have to undertake research and to publish that research in journals and in books, but also I should spend time working on my teaching to increase the impact that I could have with MBA students, with executives. Teaching is a fundamental part of what we do in the business school world. So if you are a teacher at the MBA level, if you teach management students, if you teach executive education, then you're in the right place, because over the next hour, I'm going to share with you 5 strategies that really will help you to increase your impact as a teacher in this business school world that we inhabit. In a moment, I'm going to introduce our guest to you in today's webinar. But at the end of this session, which is going to last about 45 minutes, I'm happy to share with you some more information about the International Teachers Program if you're interested. But right now, let me introduce my guest for today, John Mullins, Associate Professor of Management Practice at London Business School. You're an amazing entrepreneur. You've launched 3 entrepreneurial ventures. One of them you took public. You're a best-selling author. The new business deal, the new business road test, getting to Plan B with Randy Commissar. That's the monk in the middle, Randy Commissar, right?
That is the one and the same guy.
And Customer Funded Business, which I am still reading, and I need you to sign it next time you're in the country.
I will do, Stephen.
To sign that. But today we're not going to talk about any of that stuff. Today we're going to talk about teaching. And I have to say, I'm just looking through the schedule of things that you've done. I mean, you multiple award-winning teacher, MBAs, executives, all sorts of other things. And then I discovered that you had also taken the International Teachers Program. I'm thinking, why? Why would you suddenly go back to school? Why did you do the International Teachers Program, John?
Yeah, that's a great question, Stephen. The honest answer is the ITP, as we call it, is run by a consortium of a dozen top business schools from around the world. And the schools, of which London Business School is one, take turns delivering the program. And when they get to deliver it, they get it for 2 years. So sort of bizarrely, every 24 years, the program comes around, and it was headed for London Business School. And the dean said to me, well, John, it's about to be our turn. Would you like to direct it? And I had served on the consortium board for 5 or 6 years at that time, but I hadn't actually taken the program. And I said to myself, well, if I'm going to agree to bring this to London Business School and to direct it, I better figure out if it's any damn good. So I said, I'm going to enroll. And I learned some cool stuff. It was fantastic. But that's why I did it.
Well, because, I mean, the program is for not only faculty teaching sort of MBA type students, but also for folks teaching exec education, and also for people who are experienced educators anyway. I remember walking up Fifth Avenue with Piero Tedeschi, who was a professor of accounting at Sao Paulo University, and I said, "Well, why are you doing this?" And he said, "Frankly, I like to kick myself up the butt from time to time." So, folks at any level can benefit from this, but I want to drill into,
and they do.
They do. 5 things. What we promised people on the call are sort of 5 tactics, 5 strategies that'll increase the impact of their teaching. And I know you're very modest, you're very unassuming, but I want to hear, what are the 5 takeaways that you had? What did you learn from the International Teachers Program, from the ITP?
Well, the first thing I learned was some stuff about learning and how students learn. We professors, most of us have gone through PhD programs, and one might think that in a PhD program you learn how to teach, but that is emphatically not the case. That never happens. So most of us learn to teach just by doing. And and by following our best instincts. And sometimes that works out well, sometimes it doesn't. In my case, that's what I had done. And so by the time I took ITP, I'd been teaching 20 years or so. So I had pretty well developed the approach I take to teaching. And I'm fundamentally a case method teacher, because I believe that when I teach with business cases that are about inspiring entrepreneurs, I teach entrepreneurship, cases about inspiring entrepreneurs really relate to my entrepreneurial audiences. And I find that the messages stick when you're a case teacher. So I had a pretty well developed approach to my teaching. But the first sort of aha moment I had when I was on ITP came in the very first session delivered by a guy named Arun Pereira from the Indian School of Business. And Arun had carefully read the research on how people learn, how adults learn, and delivered a session on the 7 drivers of learning. And so all of a sudden I had a sort of a research underpinning to that which I was already doing quite a lot of already, but I wasn't perhaps doing quite as carefully or as intentionally perhaps as I might. So the 3 key of those drivers in my view are that learning needs to be active. We don't just talk at people and hope it goes in one ear and doesn't just pass out the other ear. We shouldn't just do that. We should have students actively engaged in the learning. A second of his drivers is that learning works better when it's collaborative. So you're not only learning on your own as a learner, but you're engaging with somebody else in the same material at the same time. And then the third one that really stuck with me is this notion of chunking. That is putting what you're teaching together in sort of bite-sized chunks that relate to things together. So they're Michael Porter's 5 forces. They're my 7 domains to assess opportunities. And when you organize things into categories like that, as it turns out, helps the brain organize and recall that learning. So what I took away from Arun's session is I need to be conscious about doing those things in every session I deliver. I was doing most of them most of the time, but I wasn't doing all of them all of the time. And of course, now I do.
Well, that's cool. I particularly like the way you described the chunking, 5 forces, 7 domains. I think that's a very practical and simple example. I think people can take that away and apply that right away, right now. But take me back over the actively engaged. I mean, I think we can probably intuitively gather a couple of those, but give me an example from your own experience or from what Arun was saying. How would we actively engage? I mean, you talk about case method. That's one way of doing it if you're formally taught to teach cases. Anything else spring to mind on the active engagement?
Well, I think what it does is it takes us away from being the sage on the stage. It's not that the learning must pass from our lips to the students. The learning can come from a variety of sources. It can come before the class even starts, from something they read or watch online, perhaps. It can come during the classroom, not only from the person at the front of the room, but from what other people say in the room. And it can come from exercises that are done in the room or projects that are done afterwards. So this learning process doesn't just happen in a verbal way. And so I make sure that in my sessions, almost all of the talking is done by the students, not by me. In fact, I had a really wise professor during my PhD, a guy named Bill Redalius at the University of Minnesota. And he said this to me one day. He said, I used to think learning was happening when my lips are moving. I have learned that the real learning is happening when other people's lips are moving. So I try and get everybody's lips moving, debating a case. Is it right? Is it wrong? Should you go north? Should you go south? And in that process, people are forced to think carefully. And I think one of our big jobs in B schools is to help people think more clearly about the kind of business problems they're going to confront.
So I like that, and what you've done there cleverly, John, is answer, I guess, the collaborative thing. Because if you're doing exercise either in class or in group session in breakout rooms, that's one mechanism, and there are many more. But I think that deals with with that. I will try and pick up with you afterwards and get a link and see if we can find some material to point people to if they're interested in picking up on Arun's work on this. I'm quite often at ISB, so I'll try and grab him for another call or perhaps another webinar some other time.
Yeah, great.
Okay, so Arun, the 7 drivers of learning: active, collaborative, chunking. You've given us a great piece of advice there. Your next point, what do you think?
So there's a guy named Per Martinsson. Per runs pedagogy at the Stockholm School of Economics. So they care deeply about teaching at that institution. And Per is responsible at the institution for making sure their pedagogies are sound, up to date, and that teachers are well trained to deliver in effective ways. So there's lots of stuff he can do, but what he did at the ITP that I attended a few years ago was a session on learning styles. And, I sort of knew that people learn differently, and there are 3 or 4 different typologies of learning styles that most professors probably have heard about. But Per took us through one such typology, and then asked us to do an exercise to take a session we do or a course we do and map it to how we are teaching to those 4 learning styles. And it was written, so we did that on big flip charts, and we all sort of drew a map of how our course catered to the 4 learning styles. And of course, all of us found that we did it a bit differently, but we all found we were targeting 1 or 2 of the 4 styles pretty effectively, but maybe there was one that we were sort of leaving behind. And that exercise enabled me to see, okay, when I design a new session, so I write a couple of new cases every year. When I design a new case and then plan how to teach that case, I need to think in my discussion questions exactly what I want everybody to do before they even see me, and I want them to do that in a way that reaches all 4 of the styles. And talk about lessons learned. Again, we do that. So did something just happen to our connection?
John, yes, you just glitched on me for a second. You were talking about, for example, sending the discussion questions before the class so they could get involved in the in that reflective, I guess, aspect of that. And then I think I missed the one after that.
Okay. So there are 4 learning styles, but the key point isn't to dwell on each of the 4 styles here. The key point is that you need to recognize you have different people in the room. Those different people learn in different ways, and we need to have activities in the pre-course preparation, in the session itself, and in the debriefing of the session at the end of the day or the end of the session that addresses the needs of each of those 4 styles.
Yeah.
So that means practical things like having some particularly active elements to the class where students are maybe discussing in buzz groups for 5 minutes some point. It means having something to read before the class for students that are, as Per calls them, theorists, who learn best by reading and absorbing at their own leisure. So there's you got to reach them all. You can't just reach some of them. Yeah. That's the key takeaway.
Some people I can imagine who perhaps haven't come across this before, and I guess the archetype of this work is Kolb's learning cycle and his book Experiential Learning from 1984, I think it was, if I remember rightly.
Yeah, that's right.
This work is very well understood, but I think sometimes we forget it. It's hiding in plain sight in a sense. But I can imagine some people coming to this for the first time might be thinking that seems a bit redundant, having almost different exercises or different material for different people. But
no, I don't think it's redundant at all. I think it's additive. So, you're taking a set of ideas and you're dealing with it from different perspectives and different points of view, and that's fine. No, it's not redundant.
I think also the way you describe it is, especially if people, the class begins before the class, so to speak, because people are doing reading before and maybe even post-program reading as well.
Yeah, and in fact, in my executive ed courses, I have everybody engaged in a study group the night before they see the professor, and they discuss the case in their little group of 5 or 6 people, having read the case, having read the article that's been assigned to help them crack the case, but not having the professor in the room. And out of that discussion, they realize, oh, gee, there are multiple perspectives on this case. I think the guy should go north, but this person who seems pretty logical thinks he should go south. And we have different arguments. And they kind of go, I wonder what it's going to be like when there are 50 people in the room instead of just 5 of us. So it really sets them up and engages the participants in the material before they ever see the professor. And the professors who teach on these programs absolutely love it because the students are so incredibly well prepared.
Yeah. I think we're setting ourselves up here, John, aren't we, for another conversation, another time about some of the challenges of, I'm thinking specifically, I guess, of executive education, where executives perhaps haven't done the preparation in advance or, aren't able to spend that kind of time. But I'll park that. I'm going to come back to you later on, or dealing with tricky situations or things we might fear that'll be tricky situations. And we'll see if people are interested in that. We'll come back and take a look at that.
Yep.
So we've got this learning styles framework, and I love the idea of, folks can actually do that right now. It would be exactly. Map their own or particular example of teaching against that. That would be a really cool thing to do as a result of sitting through this. What's your third activity or example?
So there's a guy named Ray Smiler that gives a lecture titled "How to Give a Really Fantastic Lecture," if you can imagine that. And I've seen Ray do this now a number of times. He's an American guy from Texas Christian University, and his work embodies all of the 7 drivers of learning, and it's fantastic to see it for real. But he began his session with us by owning the room, is his phrase. So Ray says, before you even start talking, you have to own the room. So maybe there's a flip chart that somebody in that room left out of place, or there's some stuff in front of you on the desk and you need to get rid of it. So he spent the first couple of minutes walking around the room, making the room to his liking before he ever said a word. And then he said, oh, I got some keys in my pocket. I got some coins in this pocket. I got to take them out. He really took us from the very first stages of what you have to do to give a really strong lecture, and then took us through the communication part of the lecture itself. And that turned out to be really timely for me because I had just published one of my books, and I was about to go on a speaking tour to promote the book. And because I'm a case teacher, I didn't know what I was going to do on this speaking tour. I can't teach cases in a 1-hour keynote. Nobody's read the case. So what was I going to do? Well, Ray was the answer because Ray helped me understand the power of storytelling. And if you can make your lecture into a coherent story with a beginning and a middle and an end and some key learning points, and then illustrate those learning points by real stories of real people in the real world, the learning sticks.
Yeah. And
I was surprised. The first one of those sessions I did in promoting the book, I did in Cambridge at the Judge School, and the host professor there was kind enough to say after my session, a very nice session, skillfully delivered. And I said, holy cow, before I saw Ray, I couldn't have done that. So I remain very indebted to Ray Smiler.
And he's done a number of books, hasn't he? And I think also perhaps in your area, entrepreneurial leadership, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, he's an entrepreneurship professor.
This phrase, own the room, I think sometimes is misunderstood. And there is, in fact, a book called Own the Room. Which I was just checking out. But I think it's much more about, fill the room with your personality, which is kind of a bit hokey. But this literally owned the room. It's my room. It's, you walk around the room, you make sure everything is where you want it to be, so you know where everything is. That I love that interpretation of that, of that phrase.
And in fact, now when I do executive ed around the world, which I do quite a lot, sometimes those things are held in a hotel, and the hotel team has set up the room in a certain way. And invariably, I end up moving around the tables and chairs to get the room to where it's going to support the kind of interactive session that is, characteristic of my teaching.
Yeah. F&B, conference people, events people, they sort of really trying to make sure that it runs smoothly from their point of view, but it's not necessarily good from an educational, from a teaching and learning point of view.
No, and they assume that what's going to happen is whoever's at the front of the room is going to do all the talking and the other people are going to do all the listening. And of course, when you teach with case studies, as I do, that is turned on its head.
Absolutely. The number of places that have these lecterns, these huge oak lecterns, and you just can't shift them, can you?
Get rid of that. No, we take that away.
Get that out.
We do shift it. We do shift it. Get it out of here.
So we've got drivers of learning, and that's to some extent, breaking up the material, chunking. I love that. Getting people talking. I love that. You're not sage on the stage. It's about getting their lips talking. I love that. Also, almost before that, when you're thinking about packaging the material together, you're putting it together in a way that speaks to the different ways that we process information and that we actually learn. Love that. Then when you're actually in the room, managing the physical space as well as the mental space, if you like, that's fantastic. What's next on your checklist?
So a wonderful OB professor from IAE in Aix-en-Provence named Carolina Serrano Archimi does a great session on inductive teaching. And, there's a long tradition among teachers that you have to sort of feed stuff with a silver spoon. Here, I'm going to give you the stuff and then I'm going to ask you to apply it. Well, Carolina turns that upside down and says, well, we're not going to start with the framework. We're going to start with a problem, and we're going to discuss a problem or a case or something. And by through the means of that discussion, we end up building the framework kind of one brick at a time. And I find that a really interesting approach. It's one I had used before, but I don't use all the time. And the most interesting place I've seen it used is with I have this 7 domains framework that I teach about how entrepreneurs can best assess opportunities. And I have one very short case that I use when I'm in the first day of an exec ed program where I want people to kind of see what they're getting into with my case methodology. So they don't prep a case for the very first session. I give them this 3-page case and they read it, and then we talk about it. And in the conversation about whether the entrepreneurs should do this new venture or not, which is what the case is about, the participants in the room start talking about the size of the market and whether it's growing or not. And they talk about the industry and would you want to be in that industry. And they talk about competition, and they talk about the customers and whether the customers are going to buy or not. Well, as they have those conversations, I can place those comments on the board into a framework that emerges out of those comments, rather than being sort of top down. Okay, here are the 7 ways we should think about this opportunity. Now let's apply the 7. It gives people a sense of ownership, keeps them engaged, and it's a really interesting way to do it. I don't teach that way all the time, but some of the time I do, and I find it really interesting to do. Inductive teaching and learning. Yeah.
I have a document. My favorite document that I use is Jan Carlson from Moments of Truth, Scandinavian Airlines, and have people go through, what is it they see this CEO doing and how is he doing it, and then building up this communication model. So that I think speaks exactly to that. But I think it's to some extent what the message, part of the message I'm getting from you is also the variety of things. We don't do one thing all the time. We do lots of different things, and that keeps people not off balance, but it keeps people engaged, because what's going to happen next and how is it going to be done next? We're not just execs or faculty or professors who have one tool. I see every problem as a nail because I'm a hammer. Tell me about the actors that you work with, because that sounds fun, John.
Yeah, it's enormous fun. So every ITP now for many, many years, we've had a bunch of actors from London's West End, led by a guy named Richard Halo. And Richard brings 3 or 4 or 5 actors with him, depending on the size of our ITP group. and teaches us about the things actors have had to learn to be effective on the stage. And that has to do with how you use your voice. Some people use their voice very effectively and can project well. Think of an opera singer who has to do that. Other people tend to, get kind of too soft and they don't project, and that doesn't work. There's posture and how you move your body and how you move and where you move. Do you stand in one place? Do you stand behind the lectern? Do you come out in front and approach the students? There's all this stuff that we do unconsciously, many of us. And Richard and his actors make it all conscious and give us some ways to be deliberate about how we use our voice, how we use our body. And the result, when we do those two things well, is we have a real presence in the room, and we are seen as credible, in command of the situation, knowledgeable. It really helps us with our audiences. And I might add, it's enormous fun to do all this stuff with the actors.
So give me one example. I mean, you've reeled off a whole list of things there. Standing close to people I understand, or standing in a different place. Give us a couple of a flavor of a couple of things that you might do.
So one of the exercises they did is they had one of the actors enter the front of the room and do it 10 times on a scale of, sort of 0, really kind of wimpy, not confident, to at the other end of the scale, rash, aggressive, maybe, too much. And he changed his behavior just a little bit on each of those entrances. And then we had a discussion about what he had just done and said, okay, where on that scale from 0 to 10 do we want to be? And we probably don't want to be at 10 because it puts a lot of people off, but maybe we want to be at about 6 or 7. And it was really interesting to see the connection of his physical use of his body and his voice in 10 different ways doing the exact same task.
Wow.
Really cool.
And it prompts you to think, as you say, how would I do that?
We can be deliberate about that. We don't have to just do it the way we do it.
And I think some people might. I've had comments before when I work with actors that, but this isn't authentic, is it? Because I'm now acting. I'm trying to pretend to be someone else. But it seems to me it's not about that. It's about inhabiting this role that we have as educators. Did that come up for you at all?
Yeah, it's completely authentic. It's just making better use of the physical tools that we have. And in every line of work, it's not just for professors. There are mental and physical tools we have at our disposal, and we might as well use them to best effect and think about how best to do that. Yeah. And that's what the actors enable us to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, these are fantastic strategies, really, John, that you're sharing. And one of the things that I guess occurs to me is if I were a young, I wish I were a young faculty member all over again, I'd be thinking, I've just spent all this time. I'm thinking about tenure track. I'm trying to get my research up to speed. I'm trying to get that next phase done. Or I'm an experienced faculty member. I'm trying to work towards getting a chair somewhere or something like that. And so teaching sometimes becomes, I guess it takes a back seat to that. And yet it is a fully fledged part of what we what we do. And I guess one thing I wanted to ask you is what would happen if we didn't spend time becoming better at this? If we didn't spend time working on the impact of our teaching? Have you got an example or something you'd share with us about what happens when this all goes horribly wrong, when we don't spend time working on the teaching? Can you pick that up?
Well, I think there's some risks when we don't. If we don't continually refresh and stay current and improve our skills, I think we get stale. And students, or any audience really, student or executive audience, can see that when a teacher has gone stale, when the examples aren't current, when it's clear that what's being said has been said 1,000 times before and isn't responsive to what's happening in the world or in the room today. So uh, I think when our teaching goes stale, it's kind of time to quit because we aren't serving our students very well. So we can't let it go stale. But I recognize that at important times in people's career, teaching can take an increased role in their set of priorities or a decreased role. And particularly at research-driven institutions where there's a lot of pressure to get tenure, people often say, well, don't worry about the teaching, focus on the research. And after you get tenure, then you can worry about being a better teacher. But interestingly, what we find at London Business School is that the new professors for whom the teaching goes really well can kind of relax and not worry about the teaching, and they can really devote their time to their research. Where the professor who's struggling with his or her teaching is now having to put more time into it, they're worried about it, and that ends up detracting from the research. So I think there's this paradox that actually getting the teaching right as quickly as you can as a young professor really helps with your research. Yeah. But even we never get it all right. So I did the ITP 3 years ago. I learned a ton of stuff, and I've been teaching 20 years, and I'm a better teacher today than I was yesterday, and yesterday I was a better teacher than the day before. We can always get better. But also, I think there are some key inflection points in the life of a typical faculty member. Perhaps we get tenure and we say, aha, okay, now I've reached that milestone. Maybe now is a time that even if my teaching's gone okay, I could devote some more time to it and maybe take my teaching up, in a stepwise fashion. So we get a lot of people on the ITP who've been, teaching for 7, 10, 15 years. And often it's people who are at these career inflection points who say, this is a good time for me to think more about my teaching. I'm going to come to the ITP and use it to put some fuel in my tank.
I've seen a few deans coming on the program in the last few years as well. I mean, what would a dean possibly get out of this? How do they articulate it, John?
Well, we have deans that come on the program. We've also had deans that become deans by having been on the program and become really skillful at teaching. So, it works both ways. But again, what we get is a chance to think differently about our teaching, learn some new stuff. It's new to us. It's not really new. It's not like the ITP is about the latest newfangled whiz-bang thing, though we do deal with some of this new digital innovation that's happening today. But really, it's about fundamentals. It's about, focusing on learning rather than teaching. So put the focus on the participant or the student, not so much on us. Those are fundamental things, and that's what the ITP does so well.
Have you got a how not to do? Have you got an absolutely blazing how not to do something? I mean, that'd be really cool to hear. I don't want you to embarrass anybody. I don't want you to feel, uncomfortable, but have you got a how not to do?
Well, it was interesting in one of the ITP sessions at the Stockholm School of Economics several years ago. The organizers of that session decided they were going to bring a star lecturer in from one of the top European institutions and have him do his lecture as an example to the students. And he's a person who is pretty much a one-way communicator. And so he did his 1.25-hour session that is widely perceived as, star-like work. But it was really interesting, I'm told, to see the body language of the faculty who were the students in that room. And they're just, kind of losing it because there's no engagement. And the whole point of ITP, or not the whole point, but the most important point of ITP is that learning just has to be active. It can't be just death by PowerPoint, as I call it.
Yeah.
And
PowerPointness.
That's the real how not to do it, and we have far too much of it. It's a tool that has not served education well, in my judgment.
Yeah. So listen, we'll wrap up in a few minutes, and I'd like to really share some thoughts on the ITP with anybody who wants to stick around. But John, you've got so much experience. I mean, we said we'd do 5. You've covered them off. You've talked about the 7 drivers of learning. Chunking, I think, will stay with me. It's great to have that back. I hadn't thought about that for a long while. Pairs work, or pairs bringing learning styles back into the equation to allow people, when they're designing and planning their stuff, to make sure that those are covered. Own the room. I'm gonna steal that. I have to tell you, I'm gonna steal that right now. Sorry, Ray, wherever you're listening. Carolina's work on inductive teaching. I think sometimes we forget it doesn't have to be full on faculty standing at the front, sage from the stage. I might steal that too. But yeah, also reminding us about the physicality of teaching. I remember one book, and I can't remember who the author is. I'll dig it out. But teaching as a performing art. We are performing when we are,
whether we like it or not.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You've got to have a personal strategy, or a personal something that now is front and center for you. Perhaps it always was. Have you got a killer strategy you could share with us, John?
Well, when we designed this current version of the ITP, when it came to London Business School, one of the things we wanted to do, because we'd had some feedback that it would be helpful, is to have a session on course design. Not so much about what do you do when you're in front of the room, but what do you do when it's time to design a new course, and how should we think about that? So in doing that, I reflected on my own experience, having designed probably 15 or 20 different courses over my academic career. And I realized that there was a parallel between the way I think about course design and the way entrepreneurs, successful entrepreneurs, think about starting new ventures. So there's this myth in entrepreneurship that the way you start a new venture is you come up with a great idea, you write a killer business plan, you go raise some money, and voila, you get rich. But actually, that rarely happens. It doesn't work that way. And many, many ventures are started in a completely different bottom-up way. And there's a wonderful researcher named Sarah Saraswati at the University of Virginia Darden School, who studied how entrepreneurs create new ventures. And what she discovered is a process that she calls effectual reasoning. The idea, and she contrasts that with what she calls causal reasoning. Causal reasoning is kind of what we typically teach in business school. There's a goal out here. I want to get to that goal. What are the different ways I could get to that goal? This way, that way, the other way. Which is the best route? Okay, that's the way I'm going to proceed. And Sarah says entrepreneurs actually turn that upside down, and they ask themselves, well, what means do I have at my disposal? And those means fall into 3 categories. Who am I? What are my traits? What am I good at? What do I love? What do I know from my prior education, prior experience? And whom do I know? And so many ventures get started by a team of people that come together, putting together who they are with what one of them knows and what one of the other one knows. And you bring together a team and you say, well, gee, by putting together these pieces that you bring and I bring, we could go off and do this. And it sounds pretty interesting. Let's do it. So it's a completely different mindset. And what I realized is that every time I've designed a course, I've done exactly that. So I asked the ITP participants to read Sarah's article called "What Makes Entrepreneurs Entrepreneurial," and I then talked about and did some exercises around how that might play out in a course design setting. So if I'm designing a new course, well, who am I? Today, I'm a case teacher. That's what I do really well. I love to teach that way. My students respond really well to my teaching that way. So it's pretty much a given when I'm going to design a new course that it's going to be a case-driven course. And then I think about what I know. So what do I already know that I can bring to this course? And where are the gaps in what I know where I've got to find somebody else? And that ends up being the whom do I know part of it. So there might be somebody I know who's an entrepreneur on whom I could write a case that would fit in this new course I want to design. Or I might go to other faculty in other institutions who have taught a somewhat similar course and say, what did you do in your course? What are the key elements of your course that really work well? And can I steal those? And so out of that, I build a course, and it's the complete opposite of what today is called backward design, where we say we have to start with clearly articulated learning objectives that create a bunch of square holes into which we have to fit square pegs. Completely opposite approach. And I think the effectual approach is actually likely to result in a more compelling course, a more inspiring course, and a course that the teacher is really going to have fun delivering.
Yeah, I love that.
It was a real surprise to me.
I haven't come across that paper before. I'm going to talk to you offline, and we'll see if we can get this. And there were a couple of other things that you mentioned, because we could actually make these links available to folks externally as well, if possible. In a moment, I'm going to just share a few thoughts on International Teachers Program, ITP, with anybody who still wants to stick around. But John, I want to say thank you for spending this time with us. I think there's more we could talk about on another occasion. Let's see if there's some interest in that. But thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us today. How can people reach you if they want to? I know you've got a website, johnwmullins.com. Any other ways people can reach you?
Well, if they just Google John Mullins at London Business School, they'll have no trouble finding me. My email is jmullins@london.edu. I'm happy to share it and be in touch with anybody who cares about teaching as much as I care about it. And the ITP has its own website, which I think, Stephen, we should probably put on a slide at the end of this thing, so that people can go there. And on that website, they'll find some testimonials from people who've actually done the ITP. They'll find application materials for the next program, which runs in January. It's all there. So
thanks, John.
Happy to help in any way I can.
If you are at all interested in ITP, give me 3 minutes and 35 seconds. I want to pull in this film.
ITP is unlike any other teaching program in the world. We want you to come to this program and learn to be the very best teacher that you can be. In this year's cohort, just like most years, we have people from more than 15 countries. We have people from every conceivable academic discipline. But the thing that unites us all is we're all passionate about helping our students learn more and more, better and better.
We teach, we research, we manage programs, so teaching is an important part of our job. I know some ITP alumni, and ITP really transformed some good teachers into outstanding teachers.
We are going through a big change at the university, and we are trying to raise the bar in teaching. And for me, it's nice to come here and have the opportunity to share with my colleagues what we can do to improve learning. It's really nice to exchange experiences and have all these very good professors giving you feedback. From now on, it seems that I'm a part of a big network that I can feel comfortable asking for help.
We coach each participant for an hour, and we ask them to teach something to a real live audience in a way that's different than the way they normally teach. It's a chance to really begin to grow as a teacher.
Within this program, we get to see a whole range of different methods and approaches. There is not one normative way of teaching, there is many possible solutions. The ITP offers a safe space to get comfortable with, for example, teaching without slides. A lot of us dream about that, but we don't dare to do it. Here you get the opportunity to practice that, and you get to see other teachers doing it and doing it well.
I discovered a very inspiring idea about the importance of the voice, the tone and the volume in the classroom, and how to use these tools in our class management.
It was really fascinating to realize that my behavior in the classroom is my deliberate choice, and I can govern it. My satisfaction, my job satisfaction, students' efficiency depends on me, and it was really fantastic and empowering.
We in the education business live in a changing world today. There's digital, there's pressure from funding bodies, there are all kinds of waves that we face. One of the things that ITP does for its faculty is keep them current on what these changes are and how best to adapt to them so they're ready to stay on top of their game.
We have a 1-week module, and the second module is the best part of a week. And then between those two modules, we have people working on projects. We ask them to, okay, take away the skills you've learned, try and transform the way you teach by exploring some new teaching styles, then come back, you'll show us what you've done, and we'll develop those skills further.
I can say that ITP is a sort of an adventure. You are in a safe environment where you have lots of interesting ideas and lots of constructive feedback on how you do things and how you can improve them.
If you have had some successes and have had some failures, you appreciate how some tools and instruments can help you to improve. So absolutely, I think it's a must after 5-6 years of teaching.
What we get on ITP is good teachers, and what we hope for and what we want them to be when they come out of the ITP is to be great teachers.